That was the first time since '78.
Thank you very much, everyone, for coming today. We got a good crowd here. This is the second in a series of talks that Gordon and I put together that really tries to highlight what we have in our own backyard, i.e. all the viticulture, the wineries in Vancouver Island, and hope to convince people who maybe have not sampled them to get out and have a look around. So this is what we're doing. The first talk we had was Lamont Brooks last month, and he brought it from a high level down, and I hope he convinced everybody that, hey, we stack up pretty good in Canada in terms of a wine growing area. And now I'm going to take it down once more and talk a little bit about the viticulture here. It'll be general and there will be specific. And hopefully again, I'm going to leave you with maybe some information that when you go into a vineyard and talk to the vineyard manager, that you can seem, I was going to say halfway interested, but maybe it's halfway intelligent about what you're looking at. And next month, we're going to bring it down once more, and Zach Brown, who is the co-owner of Alderley Wineries up in Cowichan, is going to come down and talk to us about making wine from island grapes. So that's the series. The viticultural tour that we're organizing is going to be something where you can go in and perhaps put to work some of the stuff we hope you take away from this, okay? So I've got three parts, I didn't want to scare you, of this presentation. And there'll be a slight break, is that correct, between each one for the video. And the first part is basically, I thought it might be useful. Some of you are familiar with the growth cycle of wine and the wine grapes. And just give you a broad outline of how these things grow every year. Because the next section, which is the viticultural practices, hangs on the basic understanding of what goes on with the vine during the year. And the last section, number 3, is essentially trying to pull it all together to give you some information about what you can do if you actually go into a vineyard and to evaluate the vineyard and evaluate the grapes, okay? All right, so part 1 is the growth cycle of general grapevines. And I'm going to start with back in January, and all of you have probably seen the little brown skeletons in the vineyard of these brown vines in the vineyard with all their little candelabra sitting up there looking very lonely all by themselves. And the first thing that the manager does is pruning. And there are numerous ways of pruning a grapevine. The 2 most common you're going to see is cane pruning and spur pruning. Okay? So cane pruning essentially means that you've got the trunk, okay, and you've got all the rest of that up there. You're going to take off everything above that head of the trunk, but you're going to save 3 of the previous year's shoots, and you're going to pick 2 and lay them down along the fruiting wire and tie them down. Okay, so that becomes your cane. The other way people do it is that they will keep a permanent cane, which terminology they call it a cordon, and instead of pruning the previous year's canes off, they only prune shoot down to about like that, and then they let the previous year's shoot produce new shoots. We don't see that here. We see primarily cane pruning. So keep an eye out for that, and it gives a better growth to the vine here. Because one of the things we really need in this part of the world is lots of sun, lots of health for it, okay? So once those 2 canes are laid down, the rest of it just goes into the burn pile or chopped up. So the next thing that happens is when the magic begins, you know, we have a bud break. And every cane that is laid down from here has dormant buds along that cane. They were formed in the previous year. They brown up, scale over, and in the spring, those buds along that cane start to get activated. And when the temperature gets around, maybe around 10 degrees, all these little tiny buds on the vine will open, and we will have little leaves start coming out. They'll look like rabbit ears when they first come out. 2 little leaves come out of this bud, looking around, wondering what the hell happens next. And the energy that they're using right now is basically from energy that they stored the previous year. Okay, so if you had a good year last year, and the energy in the trunk and roots are good, you're going to have a fairly vigorous wine. If it wasn't that great last year, maybe you're not going to be so lucky this year. So the energy to get them going is from last year's harvest. So once these little leaves are out, they start growing, as shoots along that cane, and the leaves start coming out, and at some point those little leaves, all of you know about photosynthesis, and when those little leaves come out, they start bringing in the sun and they start photosynthesis, and gradually they take over the energy for the ensuing growth of the vine, and it really starts rock and rolling right now. The risks at this stage generally are frost. If you have buds coming up, little delicate things, you get a frost, you're going to have a lot of damage. Fortunately here, we don't see a lot of white frost, so we don't have that problem. So then the leaves start growing. This is the vegetative stage after the bud break, is the leaves really start growing. And what you're going to see is shoots with little leaves, more shoots, little leaves, and incipient flower clusters. First they're about 1 inch long, like your finger, and then they gradually, as it grows, they get to be, I shouldn't use that finger, I'm going to use this one. And they're get about as long as your finger, and these are the potential flower clusters that are on that shoot. And they're like little green BBs all along that little flower cluster. Okay, so they'll grow flower clusters in this vegetative stage. That leads right into the actual flowering. Who knew that vines flowered? Everybody? Yeah. They do flower. After 5 or 6 weeks after bud break, petals will open on those little BBs, and little tiny white flowers generally will appear on that flower cluster that's like that. And wait for pollination and fertilization. Fortunately, most of our cultivated grapes in the world are hermaphroditic. In other words, they will self-pollinate, and so they don't need another vine or anything like that. Now, you do get cross-pollination, but that's another topic. But they pollinate amongst themselves, okay? So flowering is probably the most riskiest stage of the growth. And it's risky because you don't control a lot of what goes on right now. You can have cold. Flowers don't like that. Fall off, die. They don't like a lot of heat. They do the same thing. Wind will blow them off. Rain will knock them off. So there's nothing you can do when you get a bad climate during flowering. Low humidity, water stress, all of these things will impact how much pollination will go on during this flowering stage.
What's the month of the flowering stage?
It's around here, it would be, June, early July. So immediately after flowering, we go into fruit set. And again, this is an important stage. These flowering and fruit set are the two most important stages. The fertilized flower starts to grow and produce grapes. The fertilization, of course, is critical because it determines the subsequent crop yield you're going to get down the road. Interestingly, not every flower gets fertilized. Some of it was become factors that I mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, climate factors. But overall, the percentage of fertilization in a grape is fairly low. Probably averages around 30% of the actual flowers will produce a berry. And it could be as high as 60, or it could be lower than 30. But it's in that range there, so you're not going to get complete fertilization as this thing goes. So once you're through those two sets, flowering, fruit set, you're almost away to the races, because then the berries start developing, and they are generally green and hard. Everybody's seen those little hard berries, green and hard. At this point in time, they're really high in acid, no sugar whatsoever, and until they end up in the horizon stage, which again you've seen, they start changing color. The black varieties will turn red, black. The white varieties will turn yellow, and they start to build up sugars within those berries. Sugar goes up, and acids go down. And so ideally, you end up at the end of the day when you harvest with a perfectly balanced grape, which of course never happens, but ideally that's what you want. And flavors and aromas are developing at the same time. So at this point, it's the only thing that's left once the berries have developed is harvest. And again, this is a stage where it's basically a subjective decision of when to do it. The viticulturist, the manager of the vineyard, he decides when he wants to pick it. They'll monitor Brix, TA, and pH, but many of the experienced people don't pick on the numbers per se. They pick on what they feel the maturity of the fruit is. And we'll talk a little bit later about what they're doing, but for around here, probably the main driver of harvest is climate. And you're going all through October, and you look at the 2-week forecast, and it looks like some bitch storm is coming over the horizon. It's going to rain like crazy. But you don't want that. The grape will suck up water, and the grapes will expand, some will burst, so on and so forth. So if you've got a lot of rain coming, come over, you're going to have to pick your grapes. Got good weather, you keep them. But so many people, I should say so many people, some people make the mistake that the longer you can hang them around here, the better aromas and flavors you're going to get. That's not really true. Once you get below a certain temperature, everything just kind of slows down. So all you're going to get if you hang your berries longer is disease. So there'll be a 0.2 temperature-wise. Just got to do it, and then work with the grape in the winery. And of course, after the harvest, the vine goes dormant again, and the leaves will stay on as long as they can. And at this time, what they're doing is building up the energy again in the root system, the trunks, etc., for the following year. So all that energy goes down, and as soon as they're done doing that, my job is over, and I fall to the ground in submission. Okay, so that's a generalized cycle of what we go through in any grapevine, with comments on ours. So that's my break. If you want to take 5 seconds here.